Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning. Good Monday morning again. And welcome For the Record. And good morning to all the For the Record listeners in For the Record land here and abroad. And my name is A. Steve McPhail, and I am hosting the show this morning for Mr. Orit O.C. Connor, who is away and cannot be here this morning. And with me this morning is our co-host, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn. And we are fortunate this morning to have with us a guest, no other than the indomitable Gilbert McLean. So good morning, Ms. Pitcairn, and good morning, Mr. McLean.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. McPhail.
I'm going to have a little rant this morning before I give you all the oxygen, both you and Dr. McPhail. So I love music. I really, so much so that my eldest, no matter what sex, would have been called jazz. Last night, I listened to the American Music Award. I listen to it every year. And as time goes by, you see that diversity is not quite what it ought to be on that show. But, you know, we live in Trump times, yeah? There was a young lady, Christina Aguilera, that sought to do Whitney. And I'm here bracing to hear, because, you know, it was 25 years since they celebrated The Bodyguard. I think one trauma overtook my body when I listened to that young lady sought to sing some of the tunes that really, really made Whitney. And I started to tremble. I says, no. Where is somebody like Jennifer Hudson? I mean, we could have chosen Patti LaBelle or Chaka Khan for I'm Every Woman. This girl really struggled. And I'm saying with all of that talent, this is who they chose. So the camera went to the performer Pink. And my daughter says, okay, Mom, it's all over Pink's face. She feels the same way that you do. And then I stopped hyperventilating because Diana Ross came on and she got the Lifetime Achievement Award. And I had to exhale. And I'm saying, oh my God. So now that that's over and done with, the trauma is not quite what it was. Good morning, Gilbert. It's great to have you. And good morning, Dr. McPhail, again. And to all of those folks listening in the diaspora and right here in the Cayman Islands, have an amazing day and a wonderful week.
So, Mr. McLean, good morning.
Good morning, Dr. McPhail.
Yeah.
Thanks for the invitation to be here. I appreciate it. And good morning to all your listeners, both here at home and abroad.
Mr. McLean, you're no stranger to the studio. You've hosted the show before.
Quite true.
And you also hosted the show for Sterling Dwayne Ebanks at the midday.
Yes.
And in fact, I would say, Mr. McLean, that your history demonstrates the ways that you are invulnerable, unshakable, and even in the lesser side that's known of you, that's known about you, your struggle, in all during your struggle, you have never weakened.
Well, thank you.
Now, let's talk about what I have found about you, because I did a little research about you on the weekend, and some of the things that I already know. Now, you were a school teacher, Ms. McLean, were you not?
That's correct. That was my first profession.
Yes.
Yes.
And you were a Michael graduate.
Yes.
And you were also a UWIA scholar, University of the West Indies scholar.
Yes, I attended UWI and did public administration.
Yes. And that led you into becoming a senior civil servant in the old, what do you call the old glass house?
That's right, just next door to us.
Yes. And you raised from the bottom of the civil service heap to become what we call a permanent secretary in those days, which they have changed the name now to First Chief Officer.
Right.
Yeah, and you were also District Commissioner of Cayman Brac and Little Cayman,
That is correct.
and in fact, not only were District Commissioner and for Cayman Brac and Little Cayman, you were also MLA for Cayman Brac and Little Cayman
That's right, for 8 years.
for 8 years,
Yes.
and you were also the MLA for Bodden Town.
Yes. I was the only person in Cayman that, from Grand Cayman, that ever was a elected representative for the BRAC. And I, as you say, I was also a representative for Bodden Town. I served in 2 districts.
And you were also a cabinet minister
Yes.
for a while, for 4 years.
Yes. Well, not quite 4. You remember that the government was changed in 2001, and it was then that myself and Dr. Frank McField became ministers, replacing the late Mrs. Edna Moyle and Mr. Kurt Tibbetts. And we came on then, and it was just over 3 years that we actually were ministers. That is Dr. Frank and myself.
And as minister, you did some outstanding things. One of the things that you did, you brought in Cynical. Well,
Yes.
Tell us what Cynical is. What does Cynical mean?
Dr. McField, cynical means and still is, and I'm real happy that I was able to contribute in that particular way to helping create a safety net for people to have health insurance. At the time, I took over from Mr. Linford Pearson, who was then the Minister for Health. I found that there was something like 1,300 odd complaints that existed then with the department or the unit in the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority that was attempting to handle both the corporate side of health insurance as well as the regulatory side. And it was a major challenge and a major problem, because at that time there was, as I recall, something like 16 different companies in the Cayman Islands that were offering health insurance, because up until now we're still captive to it. Everyone here must have health insurance. But it was absolutely despicable what was happening, because it seemed as if someone felt that they were going to have a headache, they got dumped out of the insurance. Any kind of previous condition or whatsoever, they were refusing to insure the persons. Plus, there was a major problem with even those who had insurance getting their bills paid when they actually took on. They had to get medical help from doctors, or they had to go to the hospital, because there was no coding. The CPT coding, the common practice terminology coding, there's thousands of them, that everything that is done medically, and I think it's predominantly in the United States, you have a code for it. And of course the insurance companies were finding a way then of saying, well, look, you have lumped this amount here together and you haven't shown what individually what has brought it to this. We can't approve this particular payment. And it was a major challenge, and that went on until I changed the situation where I brought in the CPT coding, and of course at that point in time, knowing the money that was obviously being reaped by insurance companies and the amount of money that I had in the ministry to pay out on behalf of government for civil servants, for veterans, for seafarers, everybody, we didn't have the skill there, neither myself or my permanent secretary, Miss Angela Bryan. And she and I decided, well, it's a good thing to try to set up a government-owned company. And it was then that I took it forward. And Cineco means Cayman Islands National Insurance Company. So when that happened was where Cineco started. And my whole idea behind it was that ultimately the thing that is said, oh, is so terrible, the single payer and whatnot and so on, that should never be. The best way of handling the health insurance for a population then of maybe 50,000 or 40-something thousand was that everybody paid into that. And I had brought in expertise to develop 4 different plans that all insurance companies would have to offer. And it didn't put the private insurance companies out of business, but everybody would be offering the same thing instead of some offering a little with 1 or 2 add-ons and charging so much for the next one doing a different thing and so on. You'd be able to actually manage it. So it hasn't come about, but I find it interesting that at this time the Premier and others have said that the way for Cayman to go is to have the single payer where everybody is basically paying into one pool and they are being taken care of. And I do know that can work because I had opportunity when I was Minister of Health to actually visit Norway. And they got to my mind, one of the best systems in the world. Everybody pays into it. Everyone knows that they're covered from the time they're born till the time they're dead. And the ludicrous thing about it, I believe, is that when a person gets 60 here in Cayman, it seems as if some invisible hand says, okay, it's time for you to die, time for you to move off the scene, particularly the civil servants. It's changed now, but it was that way. And, we can't cover you anymore, so move along. Well, for those people who are not covered anymore by the private sector, they are definitely falling to government to provide for them. And where I'm concerned, healthcare, health insurance should not be a commodity. It is a social service, and everybody should have access to health insurance because really it is the best way of people being covered for health insurance.
So, Mr. McLean, thank you. We are going to have a break now, and when we come back, we're going to actually continue. Thank you. I'm Steve McPhail holding for Mr. Connor this morning. Please don't forget to call our toll-free number if you want to engage into this conversation. The number is 1-800-534-8255. And we also have a WhatsApp number, and I will give you the number now. It's 925-3261. That's our WhatsApp number. For the records, WhatsApp number is 925-3261. Mr. McLean, before we went on the break, you were talking about Cineco, and I believe that I share your views about Cineco being a single-payer company. Mr. McLean, do you think that healthcare should be a commodity for sale, or should healthcare be for everyone?
Mr. McPhail, healthcare should be for everyone. Everyone.
And should be a right to have healthcare.
It should be a right. It should be a right because children are born. They need health care. The parent, the mother, before the child is even born, needs health care. So what I think that Cayman should aim at, and certainly it was my view at the time, and I had the opportunity of dealing with it, was that we should look at a situation where everyone paid into it, and it didn't stop at 60 and so on. People simply paid in, and it would come down to a point where, let's say it was 3% or 4% or whatever of the pay in to the pool, and it would be a nationally managed company via Cineco. And also I might say that my idea was that we would hire the very best in health insurance to have them manage this, and it would be done watertight, that there would be no opportunity for problems and so on, and that we'd go on because we're going to need it forever. As long as there are people, we're going to need health insurance.
Because if
care.
if we take that argument logically, then it seems to me that as you age, it's over when you're over 60 is when you actually need the health care.
I totally agree with you. And the ludicrous thing is that it seems here in Cayman that as a person gets older, the insurance companies are less and less inclined to offer insurance
But
coverage.
what does that tell you then?
It's about the money for them. And it falls to government via Cineco then to pick up the slack in all areas for those persons who are getting older, for the veterans, for the seamen, for the uninsurables as they are called. It all falls to government. And I mean, if anybody want to be truthful, it is the cost is escalating every single year. And while I think of it, to Dr. McField, let me just say that I understand that government supposedly, or the HSA supposedly, is going to make every effort to collect monies that are owed. I can recall when the late Mr. Norberg Thompson wrote to me as minister and said that he was interested in the collections that were outstanding at that time. What I was given by the administration is there was like $50 million outstanding then for government that hadn't been collected. But when I dug down into it and was more than happy to do so, I think he was saying that he would do it for like 40 cents on the dollar, which would have been much, much, much more than we had hoped to have. I wasn't averse to that. It would have to have been approved by cabinet, which I didn't see a problem there. But the truth is, the records did not exist. And that was another thing at that point where it was necessary to computerize all the records in the HSA, which I did with the SORNA system, that a record could be kept from the time you check in. Someone checks you into the computer, and it follows you right around. You see the doctor until you come back out. But I took legal advice on it, and they said, look, if you put people out there to collect these monies, and you have people who have paid, and you put them in an embarrassing position, take them to court or whatever, they can turn around and sue you. And I don't know that things have changed that much that the monies that are outstanding, that they can truly be accurately collected at this time. I mean, it's good if it can be done, but let me just say I have my doubts.
So where do you see the cynical going then? Where do you see where do you believe it's going, and where do you believe it should go then?
I hope by utterances I've heard in the Legislative Assembly and by different ones there, and there are some who have been around that I know for sure. Chris Saunders, I had Chris Saunders appointed. He was in charge of the finance subcommittee at the HSA when I was minister on the board. He was on the board. And I know MLA Al Saku, he was also there. He was the one that I appointed as having expertise in computer services, which he is. That is his field, computers. So they are making statements, and the Premier, that it has to be expanded. And I think I've also heard Minister McTaggart saying that it needs to be expanded. I totally agree. I mean, it's owned by government. It's a full-fledged insurance company. Cineco could virtually offer house coverage, insurance coverage, could do cars, and it could certainly do health, which is the main thing that it is presently doing. And the stupid thing about saying that it can't insure anyone who earns more than $30,000 a year, that is absolutely insanity. In other words, what it's saying, look, we want the pennies, and you, the private companies, you get the fat. You get the fat of the land. So I hope most sincerely that they will expand Cynical and see to it that it becomes what it actually can be. It's not a question of not wanting the private sector to this or that or the other. And I never did subscribe to the craziness about government mustn't compete with the private sector. It's not a matter of competing. It's a matter of meeting a need. And I see healthcare and health insurance as a social service, not a commodity.
Ms. Teresa, what do you?
No, it was just as I listened to Gilbert, Mr. McLean. I know him as Gilly.
Yeah, you know me as Gilbert. That's cool.
Yeah,
We're not going to change that.
right. I had the pleasure, obviously, of assisting you with your campaign and the Honorable Roy Borden as well many, many years ago.
Sure.
And as I sit back, I reflect on the qualities that I admired about you then and continue to do today, and indeed what motivated me to assist you with the campaign at the time, because you're somebody that doesn't really shy away from the difficult things, and you have a certain depth of seriousness and a profound sense of doing things along a certain moral compass that we seem to lack today. And as I sit back and think of the contributions that I know that you've made, because I've sat with you, Steve and Roy, long enough to know about, even when you were younger, the groundbreaking achievements that you made that went counter to the culture. And you did it, and you were willing to stand on your own, and you did it simply because you thought it was the right thing to do. And I sit here listening to you speaking about health insurance, and I even recall at the time when you were developing the idea of Cynical, of it evolving to be and expanding, as we were seeing now some 16 years, 15 years after the fact, and I'm impressed. I know we have
a caller, so we are going to go to the phone lines right away. Caller, go ahead. You're on for the record.
Good morning to your panel. Good morning to your visiting contributor.
Good morning, caller.
Good morning.
Former minister. I had the privilege of serving on the board of directors for a term. And during that tenure, I made a contribution in terms of suggesting that we move on to become, Cynical moves on to become a full mutual insurance company with the members of the Caymanian public becoming shareholders.
Wonderful.
And expanding the menu of services. That was suggested about 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They have a captive audience.
Yep.
They have a captive audience. They have a captive market.
Yep.
The challenge we have had was political directorates have kowtowed to the power of private concerns that cherry-pick and left all the toxic market segments to the government to handle.
That's right.
And the same people are the same people who are suggesting that government needs to be shrunken. They're the same people who suggest that
Amen.
important, indispensable services must be maintained by government, and that the same government facilities cannot have a functional sector of their business model which has a funding stream to cover important social indispensable parts of our society. Now, if Cynical Diverse enabled us to have coverage for auto, competed for property, it would be able to take care of all the indigent and all the challenges that face people who are uninsurable otherwise, while providing a good service. Geico was the word Geico is government employee insurance company. It is now a private concern, but it began with a captive audience out of the mutual insurance concept. I do believe that we need to go in that direction. It is not too late, but we need to be smart and apply the wisdom that is innate in this country and shut down the naysayers who have been controlling our interests for too long.
Thank you, caller. Thank you, caller. We are going to break for the news now. And when we come back, we are going to continue our dialogue with Mr. McLean, our guest. We're back, and I promised that when we came back, we were going to continue with Mr. McLean, but I just want to remind all your listeners about our WhatsApp number, 925-3261. and our call number 1-800-534-8255. We have two callers on the line, so we're going to go to the first caller. Thank you for holding. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen and lady. I'm just calling because this insurance thing is something that I've been very vocal about for a long time, and I'd like to say thanks to Mr. McLean for implementing it during his administration while as minister. But to say expand cynical, sure, and as Mr. McLean said earlier, in respect of they could do health. They could do housing, and they can do vehicles as well. The insurance companies in Cayman, as far as I'm concerned, I've said it before and I'll say it again, they're licensed cartels. They're out there. They're simply picking and choosing who to, before they implemented laws that they can't do that anymore, I understand. They want to pick and choose and refuse who to insure, right? But then, so whenever the person can't get medical cover, because I know people who are here on work permits that is insured with cynical because they couldn't get health cover with the private healthcare providers.
Mm-hmm.
That presents a liability to the government, to the country, to all of us. And so if they are not willing to take on those people who are at a higher risk, then yeah, let's get cynical to where they are now able to offer other services outside the remit of healthcare. I mean, it's just really a serious situation with these insurance companies, and yet they get on the same radio. There's a segment on the other show where they come on and defend themselves, vigorously defend themselves, and I think it's ludicrous to say the least that they're trying to defend themselves in a position that clearly they have breached every moral and virtual concept there is in regards to providing the cover that they should. You're paying $100 and something a month, and at the end of the day, I think that you're lucky if you get $200-300 a year off of it. Ridiculous. I say expand cynical, get it to where they're providing all the other insurances, and forget about this competing clause. There's no competing clause here. It is to give better services to the Cayman Islands and to the people. Thanks.
Thank you, caller. We have two more calls, and we are going to take the calls, and then we're going to have Mr. McLean respond after the call. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Dr. Steve.
Good morning.
Honorable McLean.
Good morning.
Friend, Mr. Teresa, this is Iwan.
Good morning, Mr. Debo.
Morning.
Very a topic close to my heart. I want to compliment Honorable McLean for starting it. And after all these years, it not came to where he intended for it to be. I'm going back to my case a little bit. When I turned 60, I wasn't sick in my life, and my insurance went up. I was hit triple, and only gave me $75 for a doctor visit a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I dropped it, not seeing that I was going to get sick. And some years after that, I got sick, and it cost me $40,000 to get my arteries cleared out.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to pay it myself. I didn't have to fall on government. But a lot of women is not able to pay it, and it falls on government. I came home then, and I noticed that the hospital never had no heart equipment, so I donated $3,000 to help buy heart equipment. That was started. And while we was on council in 2002, we suggested the seafarers are talking about now to take up a little donation from every member to help with our health care. So every member right now is paying $10 a month to help with our health care. The money was donated several times when McLean, Honorable Eden got in. He told us to keep it. But Seneco was a
commendable.
godsend, and I want to compliment Mr. Gilbert for bringing it in. He got some of the best people in the field to put it together. So after all these years, it's still not operating how he intended to operate. And I ask the powers to be to do it. Don't make the private insurance cherry pick who they want, and when you get old or sick, turn you over to Seneca. So I believe that it should be intended. And government, if you're listening, I know you're listening, if you need some help with all of that, why don't you give Honorable McLean a chance to help you all? I don't want to go on no longer, but you all have a blessed day.
Thank you, caller. We have one more caller before we go to the break. Caller, go ahead.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Excellent subject this morning, and one that we talk about, but we're not moving towards resolution. And one that is going to be a great impact on future generations of Caymanians and residents in this country, but it's just being kicked down the road.
Yep.
Gilbert, I listened with interest to what you were saying about Cynical, and the way the Cynical was designed to be structured, or thought to be structured. Whether it has fulfilled that mandate is to be questioned.
Right.
But the private insurance company, I cannot agree with you more, has taken over and has changed it from what it was intended to be to something different.
Yeah.
And the regulation is where things have fallen down, like in pensions. We've had regulatory capture, where the insurance companies have captured the regulator, told them how they must structure it. And the standard plans, like you spoke about earlier, where you've been able to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges.
Yeah.
And you'd be able to see the rate between the two. But they've allowed them to do a smoke and mirrors game. They add this, but this plan is different than the other one, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And also, they drop the way that they drop people. Now, we are not in a normal health insurance market. And I say that because we have a law that says that everyone is supposed to be in health insurance.
That's right.
And they apply the adverse selection. That is, people take insurance only when they believe they're going to be sick. The concept in other countries where it's optional and voluntary when you go into health insurance.
Yeah.
And we need to get to a community rate where from birth to death there is one rate and the costs are averaged out over the lifetime of somebody. As you have pointed out, Mr. Ivan has pointed out, I've experienced it myself, with this massive increase in the latter years, and we are now at a situation where people just simply cannot afford. At $6 an hour, they cannot afford health insurance.
That's correct.
Cynical isn't covering the premiums. The people go to the hospital, they get the treatment, they cannot afford to pay the bills, and I don't care how many bill collectors you get. The people are not going to be able to afford it. You're going to put a bunch of people into bankruptcy? Is that what government is preparing to do? It sounds wonderful. Oh, if you owe the bill, you got to pay it. But you can't get blood out of stone.
That's right.
2 minutes, caller, before break.
Okay. And the standard health and standard rate, the community rate system, is where we need to go as long as we have a law that says everybody has to have health insurance.
Right.
To bring some sense back into it.
That's
One
right.
thing is for sure. The mix with a mandatory law and then allowing the insurance company to operate free rein without the standard plan is total madness. Will never work. And we've discussed this before when you were there. And it will continue to be a problem until it is fixed. Everything else is smoke and mirrors pasting over the window by government.
Thank
Get
you.
to the bottom of it.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you, sir.
We are
Okay,
going to
right,
go to the
Billy.
break. We are going to go to the break now, and when we come back, we are going to take the other callers. So please don't go away. Just hold on. We are going to be right back. Thank you. We're back, and I'm holding for Mr. Rick Connor this morning, Steve McPhail. The WhatsApp numbers is 925-3261, and the phone line is 1-800-534-8255. We have no callers on the line right now, so Mr. McLean, we would like to have your response from the calls that we had previously.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to thank the first caller and also my good friend there, Ivan Farrington, who has always been supportive, and I'd like to say that the seafarers are really to be complimented, because they of course these are the older true Caymanians that have been the seamen and so on. They collected money, and I remember on 2 different occasions I received checks of $45,000. They were, and I suppose they still are, the only group of persons here in these islands who thought it was right to collect some money to give the government, because government in effect was given to them by providing the coverage that they get. A dying breed, unfortunately. And of course, Mr. Billy Adams, Billy has an understanding of this situation as much as anyone you will find in this society. And being a businessman and largely from the private sector himself, I personally am impressed of how he can reason and rationalize the importance of doing something to fix the situation where everybody in this country, till the end time for them, can actually get the coverage that they should get where their health is concerned. But there's one point that I would like,
Mr. McLean, so if you hold your
Okay.
your thoughts there, we're going to go to the phone lines. Caller, go ahead. You're on the phone. You're on the record.
Yeah, good morning, Steve-O, and good morning, Mr. Gilbert.
Good morning.
good morning.
I'm calling because I wanted to just tell you about something I noticed or saw in the paper. We have an ad for this off-reg thing, the Utility Regulation and Competition Office, and it's looking for a chief fuels inspector. Well, I checked both the Compass and this is in the Times, Cayman Times, full-page ad in Friday's paper. I looked back through the week and I was seeing ads in any of the papers, including this one. But it's for this chief fuels inspector and director of fuels market. Make it brief. It gives you a summary of what the job entails and all that. Then it says key responsibilities and so on. Then near the bottom, it's got the qualifications required. And it says, at a minimum, the post holder must possess the following: a master's degree in one of the following: engineering, business, economics, and/or finance management, law or political science, professional certification in the appropriate disciplines would be desirable. A minimum of 10 years progressive experience in oil and gas sector consulting or other related industry. A minimum of 7 years financial and people management experience at the senior management level. A 5 years experience of working at a strategic interface between the government and private sector business, being in either a public sector or private sector role. Certification and/or 5 years experience in technical code or standards established in the oil and gas sector is a critical requirement. Salary benefits, salary of CI 128,292 to 148,788 per annum. Competitive medical benefits, blah, blah, blah. Okay. At the bottom now, it says applications are Caymanians, the spouse of a Caymanian, or the holder of a residency and employment rights certificate only need apply. All applications must include cover letter, curriculum vitae, and 2 professional and 2 current character references. Interested persons should submit their applications to this is the off-reg online thing there, off-reg network. Anyway.
Come on. Get to your
Yeah,
point,
but
caller.
listen, the deadline for the application now, this was written on the 17th. There's no other, I checked the papers, there's no other ad in any of the papers before this. The deadline for applications is the 21st of November, 2017. Now, the Friday was the 17th.
But get to the point, caller.
The point is, Steve, they've given this ad here 3 days, or 1 day, actually, because you got Monday today, because it's closed tomorrow. There was something wrong with that ad. And I don't know what. But the thing is, it looks like me that somebody has already been handpicked for the job, because you don't run an ad this important for 2 days with all the qualifications that need all these things, and nobody's going to be looking at likely to see the ad between Friday and Tuesday.
Well, it seems to me, caller, that they're looking for a CEO from Aramco or from Texaco to fill that job. I don't think that anyone in Cayman have those qualifications to fill that job. So thank you, caller. We're going to go to the next call. Caller, you're on the record. Go ahead.
Morning, Dr. Maxfield. Good morning, Mrs. Pitcairn.
Good morning.
Good morning to Mr. Gilbert McLean. It's Johan Moxham. How's it going, guys?
Good morning. Doing well, thanks.
Let me start off throwing a couple of bouquets. Mr. Gilbert, thank you on behalf of every right-thinking member of society for your vision and your courage to forge ahead with Cineco. Unfortunately, the vision hasn't been carried out to its fullest because it would appear to have been hijacked by several stakeholders along the way, and the vision in itself represented competition for the major players in the health insurance game in the Cayman Islands. The reason why I start off by making that point, sir, is because with historians like Dr. McFeel, yourself in the studio, perhaps you could speak to the legacy issues as to who really drives the process and the bus when it comes to health insurance policies and practices in the Cayman Islands. When you look at the fact that you have certain families that are major stakeholders in certain businesses in the industry, and they are somewhat guaranteed a level of profitability by virtue of the fact that policies are able to be drafted and legislation is able to be drafted in order to help their cause. That is called government-sponsored corporate welfare. That is no different from what is transpiring with regards to this project on the cruise birthing pairs, where come hell or high water, the government is committed to bailing out key supporters, families, friends, so on and so forth. So in order for the Caymanian people to understand why these things happen and why the older persons get kicked off of certain lists, it's because corporate Cayman and certain businesses just want the benefits and the profitability. And the reason why they can afford to do so is because our legislators are sponsored by and in dire need of the continued support of these families and these persons who have traditionally been the drivers of the Caymanian economy. But this is no longer 1975, 1985. This is now 2017. But the modus operandi continues to be the same, whilst the average taxpayer is responsible for helping government enact policies and directives whereby we are all effectively paying for the government-sponsored corporate welfare system that exists. The irony of it all is you have government that will tell people, average hardworking people that are trying to make 2 nickels turn into 10 cents, you should pay your bills. You should pay your bills. You shouldn't overextend yourself. Yet we have no qualms in bailing out major companies and ensuring that we are facilitating their quest to be as profitable as possible or to bail them out whenever they find themselves in choppy water. So I would love to hear you guys speak to these issues, but those are some of the root causes as to why the health insurance situation in Cayman and why Cineco finds itself the way that it does, because we are comfortable in propping up private enterprise instead of doing the right thing and saying, listen, you got sink or swim like everybody else. Your business is no better than John Brown's business or a small man's business, but our politicians are bought and paid for, and they subscribe to that theory of looking out for those that fuel the war chest and the campaign coffers.
Thank you, caller. We are going to have Mr. McLean respond to your comments after we come back from the break. We're back now. Mr. McLean, do we have any callers on the line? We haven't got any callers on the line, so we are going to go right back to the October discussion.
Mr. McField, there's a point that I would like to raise where health insurance is concerned with government. Now, of course, the largest number of persons who are covered by government on the Cineco are the civil servants. There's the seafarers, there's the veterans, and they call the uninsurables, and persons who are much older and have serious medical problems and so on. But I would like someone rationally to tell me how on earth is it okay, permissible, acceptable, particularly the financial brains in government, and there are many who claim to have that, allowing the government companies and authorities to insure with the private sector health insurance companies, and they not instead insuring with Cineco, including the HSA. I understand the HSA is not insured with Cineco too. How on earth does that make sense when you think of the fact that some of these entities are paying millions of dollars into the private sector companies when they could be paying those millions into the government owned? If we take ourselves here and we have, let's say we're all business people with our own health insurance company, would we not expect or want our employees to insure with our company where we could give them a better deal and so on? How is it that the different authorities, and I've heard of, I guess it got to be 3, 4, maybe 5, they're with the private sector? How is that rational, or how does that make sense that the government not simply say to its companies and its authorities, listen, you're going to be insured with Cineco.
There should be
finish with engines.
There should be a law and regulations to do that. That was one of the things that came out of the legislature this last week. I was surprised to see that that the gentleman who is the CEO for Cineco says that some of the government companies and entities opt out to go to the private sector for their insurance for their employees. How is that possible?
I did see that as well, and I wondered about that because I know that Mr. Tibbetts is doing a good job there, in my opinion, from way back when he first went there and so on. But I did see that very thing, and I certainly disagree with him that having that competition and so on is good when that competition means that is pulling away money that could and should be coming to government, in my opinion. And, of course, in some instances, monopolies, as he spoke of, monopolies do is not necessarily good for competition. But when you have a monopoly such as we could have for the 40 or 50,000 people we got in this country in health insurance, which is properly managed and properly costed, then certainly having that one single situation is acceptable, in my opinion. How can government afford that to go elsewhere when they're all government owned, they're all in effect, government workers and so on. Why or how does that make sense? Is the lobby that strong to make people behave what I think is irrational?
So, Mr. McLean, would that be in the millions of dollars that they're paying out to the private sector?
Mr. McField, it has to be over time. It got to be, because if you take 100, 200 employees or whatever at 2,000 each and so on for the high end coverage, it got to be.
We have 2 calls, so we're going to go to the first call now. Caller, go ahead. You're on the record.
Hello, is this for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I work in the health insurance industry, and I wanted to give a couple counterpoints to the discussion this morning.
Yes, ma'am.
One is about the standard plan being a community rated. It, in essence, because of the reforms of the 2013 health insurance laws, the insurers can only do 2 times their standard rates. Other than that, they have to go to the Health Insurance Commission to get permission to rate higher than that. And it takes a lot of actuarial studies, and it has to be somebody that's real. I mean, the Health Insurance Commission will not approve higher than 2 times the rates unless there's really high risk on board. And they're not allowed to deny anymore. So it's not a situation where the worst risk is shunting over to Cineco anymore. But there is a major crisis for people leaving jobs, that there's not very many options available to them. Because when the law increased the portability, it also increased it on individual plans. And if the insurers were being forced to accept high-risk people coming off of group plans onto individual plans and not being able to really rate for the risk or do limitations to lower levels on certain plans, they just withdrew out of the high plan market on the individual basis. You can barely find a high plan on an individual basis. It is a crisis for people that have the money to buy. There's nothing to buy. That's compliant under the law, hardly. And then the other thing about the authorities is that they don't really get the benefit of all of the government civil service retirements and medical extensions. And they're not always profitable. Sometimes they have large loss ratios. But they want to maintain the freedom of people to go outside of the HSA sometimes. That's part of their retention and recruiting tools is to have a health plan that's not limited to only government providers.
Yeah.
So I know they've developed a plan for the authorities to use that does give choice of going to private providers. And for some of our clients, we've gotten that quoted, but it has come in high because they're looking at the risk. And if it's high risk, they're rating them high because not all the authorities have no risk. They have mixed risk just like any other group of employees. And Cayman has lots of cancers and a lot of it's not as profitable I think as people think sometimes. Although the margins, I agree, the working margins are kind of large sometimes. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes the insurance money is paying out $1.50 for every dollar they get in premium. So it goes hot and cold, right? But the authorities, the issue that's happening in all of the insurance market is that as the rates go up, a lot of employers are going to a 2-tier program. Not everybody's on a high plan anymore. So they have a middle plan or even an enhanced basic plan, and then the Cineco pretty much developed only a high plan for the authorities to use, and the employers who have gone to 2 tiers can't afford to put everybody back on a high plan, and the employees themselves can't afford the family contribution. So you can't really force the authorities to do into the system of Cineco if they're not getting the benefits of the retirement benefits and all that too. So it seems like they should be able to maintain their choice because they are working independently when they're an authority. Is that correct?
Well, the authorities are entities which, we have to go to.
We have 2 calls. So, caller, thank you very much. We have 2 calls, and when we could get back from the calls, and are we going to have Mr. McLean to continue the dialogue? Caller, go ahead. You're on the record.
Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
And good morning to you, Palm.
Good morning.
Good
to
morning.
whoever's in there. I'm just tuning in. You have open mic this morning?
No, we're talking about cynical.
Just about cynical.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to talk about water search. Is that a problem?
Well, probably another time.
Okay. And that lady just now, I was listening to her. You pay your insurance in Cayman dollars, and when they pay you back, they pay you back in U.S. dollars. And there you are losing on your dollar value, I believe. But anyhow, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Your next caller, Carla, go ahead. You're on the record.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
I'd just like to say, Mr. McLean, you made a very good point there, and I thank you again, because without your initiative in the legislature when you were there, we wouldn't have had Seneco. And we all know why that came about. It was because a private insurer gave the government employees a lot of a runaround, or wouldn't insure them or something. Anyway, what I also want to say about Seneco is that I think they're doing a great job, but I would also encourage business owners who have plans with private insurers to consider switching their SHIC plans, at least their SHIC, the standard health insurance contracts, to Seneco, because you get a really good rate there. And not only that, that's our own company, and we should be promoting them, and we should be improving on them, and we should be giving them more business, because that's going to also help the country as well in the trickle down of things. And the other problem that I see is that when the SHIC plan was introduced in the Legislative Assembly, it was nothing to do with you, Mr. McLean. This came after, during Minister Scotland's administration. They made it, they risk rated it. And it's quite unfair, because you have one insurer, private insurer, risk rating you at $300 a month, and then Seneco risk rating you at $177 a month. So there's so much disparity there for the same exact plan. You're not getting any additional coverage anyway. You're paying more money for less results, or less coverage, if you want to call it that. And I think the risk rating of the SHIC plan is quite unfair. It's a mandatory plan. It's a legislated mandatory plan, and it should not come with any risk rating. If you're going to risk rate someone on the SHIC plan, then you should say, okay, you're going to get additional coverage that also balances out what you're paying a month. I mean, I was risk rated at $504 a month because I have type 2 diabetes that's controlled, and I could prove to them that it's controlled, and that didn't even matter. And I think stuff like that is where members should be given that sort of rebate on their monthly premiums, because if you're doing everything in your power to ensure that you're healthier, you're taking care of yourself, you're keeping your A1C down every 3 months, it's below the 7.0 type range, then they should really review you like every 6 months or something and say, okay, we're reducing your policy premium now to this, because you're showing that your results is much better and you're improving on it. So, I mean, this high-end risk rating of individuals with certain elements is just unfair under the SHIC plan. And that's what I want to say. And I think Seneco is a great insurance carrier, and I would encourage a lot of businesses to move their plans there, especially the SHIC plan. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. We are going to go to the news break now, and when we in the next 2 minutes, and so Mr. McLean, we're going to give you a chance to comment on some of the callers that we had.
Well, one of the callers, and they say that they are involved with insurance. I agree with one thing that individual said. That it's a crisis. It's a major crisis in this country, and the government needs itself to sit down and get the situation corrected using Seneco to expand it and to do whatever there is necessary, and stop what is a higher and more sophisticated cherry picking and so on. This risk rating, like the last caller just said, she's paying $500 and so on. Now, it seems as if the objection is that everybody, you don't want to cover persons individually. My thinking is that if everybody is paying in for a particular level of coverage that is creating a certain inflow or revenue that could be utilized by Cineco to enhance its own revenue collection. But of course, it's okay to pick off people. Well, you got diabetes, I have high blood pressure, Teresa has something else. You can charge like that individually, but when it comes down to doing what would make sense for the overall, that is where the problem comes in. And don't tell me that it's not making money when there are 7 people, different companies in that business, and the one that's suffering is Cineco.
We are going to go to the news break now. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion. I'm Steve McPhail, sitting in for our corner this morning. Don't forget our WhatsApp number, 925-3261, and our phone line, 1-800-3534-8255, which is free. Mr. McLean, we are going to ask you to reply to what some of the caller just said, and we are going to ask Ms. Teresa Pitcairn for her views also.
Well, thank you. I wanted to also reply to the point about that civil servants are supposed to be given the coverage in the authorities when they are working in these authorities. They're supposed to be covered. Well, everybody's supposed to be covered in the country by health insurance. Now, those who have transferred from government under as civil servants as such, they would have the benefit that civil servants prior had. Those who have come in later, there would be a difference there. But the fact is that the private sector is changing the offerings, the different plans and so on. One of the things that the government can do is, again, to take the 4 plans that were there, let's say, and look at them, adjust them, analyze them, see how relevant it is to now make whatever changes that might make sense. One thing for sure is that the present SHIC plan hardly covers anything for people, and that is the one that is being offered by Cineco as well, and all the others. So that's obviously making money. And of course, for the private sector companies, their aim is to make profits, and if they're not making profits, they're going to stop offering it. So that there is no reasonable argument for the government not acting or saying to its companies and its authorities, look, you are going to insure with Cineco, and saying to Cineco, the time has come, we're going to get the usual expertise here and so on to analyze this whole situation, and you have to be the moving force that is going to make it possible for all of the people in Cayman to be able to be covered by insurance. There's reinsurance as well, which, to the best of my knowledge, Cineco is using that. But the more numbers that is in any different company, the more inflow of revenue there is. And of course, you lay it off with the reinsurers, and of course, the young ones who don't really need health coverage that often, they're paying for the older ones. The older ones are dying off, so that is the cycle of life. And it would represent that clearly if the government should move to do it. Well, I would hope so, because, I mean, the costs that I'm hearing about now for healthcare, something needs to happen real fast, because either they're going to allow people to die or fix it, because it's ever mounting, you know.
Ms. Pitcairn?
Someone sent me a text. Government policies geared to the protection of a special class of Caymanians. And
I think you need to speak in the mic.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm just repeating what, some of the commentary that people are making. Government policies geared to protecting a certain special class of Caymanians. and that one should consider who own the private insurance companies. Some folks have been commenting on the cost of insurance as well. I guess my question is, what are the ethical standards that any government administration use to measure the type of policies that are necessary for a community? We on this show, some of the times we speak of the costs that people incur, entrepreneurs incur when they run in small businesses. Many people complain that they can't afford to pay for pensions and that they can't afford to pay for the health insurance. We also talk about the wage, the minimum wage that people earn, that this is not sufficient for people to live. So we're developing a sort of our own kind of poverty here. If what we are hearing this morning is true about the crisis level that people perceive, what steps are going to be taken to address it? And I mean, people call the show over and over and over and over, but, I'm not sure what their expectations are by airing their views when nothing changes. So
I think that's a big question to be answered because, I listen to this show regularly, 3 days a week, and I find it most informative. There are things that I have some knowledge of, but beyond that too, I learn things by listening here. And people call in and it's complaining about the realities that exist. But what Caymanians need to understand, what every one of us, and particularly those of us with generational connections need to understand, is that every 4 years, and most recently here on the 24th of May just gone, we elected people to represent us. I find it unimpressive that we have $1.5 billion in the next 2 years, and I see an article in the papers, just glanced at it this morning, how is that going to be spent? That's the secret of it, how it's going to be spent. The Scandinavian countries have proven that dealing with people's needs is the best and surest and most stable way in the world to proceed. When we talk, and everybody's talking about education, oh, it's education, this is education, that, and so on. You have he or she who might be the Minister for Education, or all of those who are in the House, cannot just say we have voted 10 million or 15 million for education. What are we talking about? Are we talking about applying it to teachers and improving teachers' salaries? Are we talking about applying it to teaching materials that schools don't have? Are they applying it to specialist teachers for children who need the extra assistance? These are the things that need to be done. And unless those people who are in government, ministers and so on, pay attention specifically in those areas, nothing is happening because the teachers themselves are intimidated by administration and they don't want to say anything, they don't want to do anything. Even those few who are Caymanians are afraid to come in. We have to shed that fear about standing up and speaking up and taking to the streets if it's necessary.
We had one call, Mr. McLean, so we're going to continue the dialogue when we come back. Caller, go ahead, you're on the record.
Good morning to the two.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The captain, member 04. Before I say my 2 bits, I would like to ask a question, Mr. McLean.
Go ahead.
Yes, and I know it's a simple yes or no answer. Hasn't it been that several times whenever our MLAs go up and have some conference, a meeting, whatever, with the British Parliament, the British government ministers, haven't they suggested time and time again that you implement some form of direct income tax here?
Definitely.
Yes, sir. Now I'll say what I have to say. I am vindicated because I suggested years ago, 16 years ago, that everybody pays 3% as a hell, and I heard you toss that figure out. That's what reminded me of it starkly. It was 16 years ago that I suggested everybody pay 3% to a health tax. It must be paid. Look at the monies we have in our coffers now if we had done it then, because we're going to have to do it. And the same would go for the pension. Mandatory should be a tax paid to the government. That's where we went completely wrong. I knew you had the right idea with what you said. Companies cannot pick and choose, and they cannot then refuse to pay the bill when they get to pay their 80% or 90% in some cases. I know what I'm saying because I have proof of it. That don't pay their bills, and many of them going to the hospital is because they refuse to pay their contractual obligated part of it. No one can deny that. I know it. I know it. When it comes from me, an ordinary little half Cayman.
You're breaking up, a caller. You're breaking up, caller. Can you change your location a bit?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you better now.
Well, what I'm saying, when those words come from me, an uneducated, half-idiot Caymanian, it has no bearing, no weight. But when it comes from two former presidents, a roundabout way of suggesting it, of the employers' union, maybe people will get the message. We cannot continue with this. People cannot afford to pay the health insurance, so everybody pays it. Those who pays a tax to the government, and you will get your fair treatment, your equal measured treatment, and as the government subsidized thing they're doing in the United States now, a roundabout complicated thing. That's what it is. But you can have voluntary insurance, as you know, Mr. Steve Macfield. That's what they have in Canada, and it works. I have family up there for way over 60 years.
Yes,
thank you very much for listening, taking the time to listen to me. With courage, that's the word. Courage.
Thank you.
Thank you, caller. We have a few minutes to go before we go to our regular break. We're going to take a break now. And when we come, this is our last break, and when we come back, we're going to have Mr. McLean continue. We're back from the break, and we have one caller on the line. Go ahead, caller. This is going to be our last caller for the morning.
Good morning, Dr. Macfield, Mr. McLean, and Mr. Karen. This is Paul Hurston with South Sound.
Good morning, Captain Paul.
Captain Paul.
Yeah, speaking about insurance, I'm not going to call his name because he's dead and gone now, but you know when this motor vehicle insurance came in, I asked this person, good friend of mine, way up in government, about why do the government form an insurance company and collect all this money? Oh, government could not get into business. I said, but you could form a company or something else owned by the government. It happened years later. All of that money went out of the country, and we could have used it. And also, I don't know if you all remember when the late Jim Borden tried to give the government a police car. Because you remember the old Land Rover that was driving. I think Miss Karen, father used to be the driver of it. Everybody knew that when I was coming. He offered, I think it was when he was president of the Rotary, he wanted to buy a police car for them, for government, but they couldn't accept it because government couldn't accept gifts in those days. But now they're accepting it. But this insurance thing, it's a mess. It needs to be straightened out. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Captain Paul. Thank you, Captain Paul. Mr. McLean, we're in our last leg now. We'd just like to move for a few other things.
Certainly.
You also, as cabinet member, also was instrumental in gazetting on the East-West Arterial Way. Also, when you were the minister, yeah.
Yes.
And you also formed the National Roads Authority.
Right.
and
Yes.
brought that law in.
Yes, I
separate
did.
the road section from the building section in the
Yes,
government.
yeah.
And you also separated the regulator from for airport. From the airport, the CIA for the CIAA. You separate the two. One was the operational. One was the regulator. You did that. So, but there are other things that people don't know about you, Mr. McLean. I would like to just raise some of them. In 1970, you also led one of the largest marches in the Cayman Islands against the government, and that was against the draconian land provisions that the government had brought in at that time that prevented people from building a house on less than an acre.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yes. Yes.
And some of the other things you did in 1980, you were also running to the government also. Opposing them also with the salary for civil servants.
Yes.
So civil servant salaries today are reflected from what you did in those days when you stood with the Civil Service Union for better salaries for the civil service.
Yeah.
And you were also, in 1991, Mr. McLean, you were also were the first member of the Legislative Assembly to introduce the draft modern Constitution that had been sent out from England by Sleepy Smith and Wallace to the people. You remember that?
I think that was the one that Governor Scott had done.
Yes.
That was before the one that was done in the 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to tell us about that, because I think that's very significant, because you were the MLA for Cayman Brac at the time, and you came to Grand Cayman to inform the people about and to discuss that draft modern constitution with them. It was the first time that we were going to have cabinet government.
Yes, I remember the things that you speak about there. Definitely, Steve, and if to just speak to the one about the 1991-92 Constitution that Governor Scott had drafted, and which was a good constitution. It moved us in different ways forward, and to even a greater extent than perhaps the one that we have now. And I remember that I held a meeting at on the second floor of the A.L. Thompson building, then facing what was the Cork Plaza. And the only person who would come near me was you. I'll never forget that. And I recall that a person who was a banker then came and shook his finger in your face and told you, you're up here, and just remember that you have a mortgage with us, and this thing is radical. What he's talking about, and so on. Well, of course, there were some of my political colleagues at that time who wanted to take us backward, if anything, instead of going forward. But you were the only person who was actually there and actually was on that platform with me, and I appreciated that then. I appreciate the thoughts of it now. And, with me, my life is always moving forward. You remind me of things that I have done that I sometimes reflect on, but it's to me, life is a forward movement, and I would like to see this government, or any government that I'll be alive to see and so on, do things that are progressive to help the society, the people in this country, our own people. And if we help our own, we will help those who come here by way of employment and so on, because one should apply the same standards across the board. But time and again, I see situations where you hear talk. I prefer to live my life where I feel a sense of accomplishment by doing. And at this stage, this country, perhaps everybody doesn't see it as I do, but I see certain deteriorations in this country that were not here before. If you just look around on the physical landscape and so on, you see derelict vehicles, you see buildings that's not painted like before. There's so many things. There's signs of the times what's happening here.
Yes.
And I have certain concerns that I would hope that the government would look at, as I was saying with the education, for example. Don't talk about education that you voted 50 million or whatever for it. Say how you are going to apply that. What are you going to do to make education work so that we can educate our people? For the money, the tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions over the years that we have spent on education, for a relative small pool of students. Good Lord, if you look at other jurisdictions right here in the Caribbean with us, what they have to show for lesser amounts is outstanding. What we have to show is, and of course that's one thing that it seems like the media likes to pick up. Well, these children can't read, they're reached high school and they can't read, and so forth, so on. I think that's a reflection on successive administrations, political administrations, and administrations that they are not seeing these things done. We need to do things instead of just talking about them.
Of course, Mr. McLean, for your views in the past, in the 1970s, you had to be exiled from your country also.
Sure did.
Yes.
Yes. When I led the demonstration about the changes in the land law, the police were around constantly following me then, because
they had the warships in there. You were threatened to be detained also.
Absolutely. So I ended up going to United States to live for a while with my then wife.
In fact, you couldn't even get employment. I believe that the only employment you could get at that time as a teacher was to dig post holes for CUC.
That is true, Mr. Macfield, and I was working for the high salary of $1.10 an hour.
And the final point I would like to make, Mr. McLean, is that we were privileged to meet one of your great colleagues, Mr. J. A. Roy Borden, last Friday.
Yeah.
And he read snippets of his manuscript for his new book that he has titled, that will be titled From the Guardhouse to the Glass House.
Yes.
Could you tell us something about that?
Yeah, well, I think that's going to be a zinger, really. And he did read a few snippets to us from it, and there are things that he has included in that book that I remember vividly from my days when he and I were colleagues in the legislature and even in the cabinet. And there's some behind the scene stuff that he has there that people doesn't necessarily know. And of course, I'm sure he has to have it checked out by lawyers and so on to make sure there's not that is not libel or not defamation. I mean, not libel is dishonest.
Or defamation.
But yeah, but it's going to be a zinger, and he says I think it's going to be published sometime in June of the coming year. But I would surely recommend to people that they buy that book, because there's stuff there that only people like he and I and others who were there then knew what was the real story behind the scenes of things that what was publicly known. They had no idea what was really happening behind the scenes.
Mr. Blaine, I listened to the snippets that Mr. Roy Borden read, and I think it's the true revelation of the mind of a colonized person by a colonizer's propaganda, softening tactics, just to remain as master, to have the master trait. That's what I think it is. It's going to be a ballistic bombshell. I told Roy, I says, they threatened you last time, but this time you're probably going to have to leave.
In fact,
the country.
He's actually concerned about that, to be honest.
Because it is politically uncompromising.
Yes, very much so.
It's blistering.
And it tells
the truth.
And it's the truth, and it narrates the story of how a little boy from Guardhouse Hill could go from the bottom to the top.
Absolutely.
And that is not any fiction. It's the truth.
The journey.
And that journey.
Yeah.
And how he got there. That is the problem that he's going to have, is how he narrates that journey.
Yeah.
And people are going to like what he has to say. But I would suggest that everybody sits up and waits for the book. It's going to come out early next year, and I know that
mid next
and
year.
I know that I believe that when they get a copy of that book, they'll stay up all night and not go to sleep, and they'll have a new dawn in the morning when they get up after reading that manual.
Yeah,
So,
I guess.
And the final comments.
No, I think as I sit back today, I say to myself, why do we have to go to such extremes to get the results? Because societal changes and making it fairly equitable, it's really, really not that difficult when you sit back and you're like, I've said on the show before that we've made great strides with respect to developing a buoyant economy. And perhaps now we need to shift that compass where we focus primarily on issues with community. I hear invariably about the frustrations that the common man has on, just living, the cost of living. I hear the frustrations that the helpers have about living, and they're willing, many of them, to leave their families wherever they're coming from to make a life here, and they're willing to swallow the abuses because it's about making sufficient money to ensure that their children can live wherever they're living. We have those problems here as well. The level of frustrations, and people talk about Caymanians are always quiet, we're conservative, we're laid back. I'm here to tell you this morning, as I've done on this show on other occasions, this silence should not be taken for granted. I hear too many comments about folks saying that they see how the other folks live and they're not having the opportunity to live a similar life in their own country.
Yeah.
Don't take that for granted. And it's sooner rather than later. And it's sad. Unless we do something different.
Well, thank you, Teresa, for that. Thank you for wrapping up, and thank you, Mr. McLean, for accepting an invitation to be our guest this morning. And thanks to all our listeners in to the Record Land here and abroad. And good morning, and we'll be back on Wednesday, and you'll have Mr. Orrid O.C. Connor with you at that time. Thank you, and goodbye.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.